This is Join Us in France, episode 18. Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Yeah.
On today's show, we'll be talking about the city of Strasbourg in the region called Alsace. I was just visiting recently in that area, and it was so beautiful. I'm not sure I'm going to let you talk very much today, Elise.
Oh, that's what I was afraid of. Here we're going to go. We're going to have a word competition, a mouth competition
right.
today. Okay.
I might be the one yakking more. Anyway, before we get started, I want to thank listeners who took the time to write us a review in iTunes, and we got a whole bunch of them this time, Elise. The first one I want to mention is Jason Van Orden, who says, a rare inside look at France. He's recently moved to France with his family, and he says, we deliver invaluable cultural insights, whether you're traveling, considering a move abroad, or just looking for a vicarious experience. Vicarious. Sorry, I said that wrong. You will find this show entertaining and informative. So thank you very much, Jason.
Yes, thank you, Jason.
And then Bugsby2 says, I just started listening and I like it so far. I'd like to hear more from Annie and also hear more French words and phrases. Well, you might get your wish today. Today, we'll see.
Now it'll be Alsatian.
Okay, also don't count on me to say the German phrases correctly. Ator88 says, planning a trip to Paris this summer, and this podcast has been extremely helpful. So thank you, Ator. T. Lobner, I think I should say it that way, says, I have enjoyed every single episode and I can't wait for the next one. I've told others about this podcast. Thank you. We hope everybody does that.
Thank you very much, yes.
And it makes me want to travel again and practice French. And then she says, don't shorten them, make them longer.
Oh, my goodness. That's 5 cups of coffee, Annie.
Don't encourage her. Anyway, Shark Girly says, I discovered Annie and Elise a couple of weeks before my first trip to Paris, and I'm so happy that I did. I was able to listen to a handful before departing from the States and plan some exciting activities. I'm now back and still listening.
Good.
How about that? Thank you.
That's wonderful.
Thank you, Shark Girly. So we have a lot of engaged listeners. We are very grateful for that. And we can tell that you've been sharing the show with friends because we can see the numbers of downloads are growing. And so that's wonderful. I also want to give a special shout out to somebody called Laura K. Lawless. She has recommended Join Us in France to her many readers on about.com French language. I saw a definite bump once she started recommending us. So thank you very much, Laura, and welcome to all those listeners who found us through her efforts.
Yes, thank you very much.
And we hope you enjoy the show. So, as always, if you can't take notes, don't worry. Keep doing what you're doing. You'll find a transcript on joinusinfrance.com/18. And now it's time for a little music, and then we'll be back to talk about Strasbourg and Alsace.
Hi, Annie.
Hello, Elise.
Today we're going to talk about a place that you have just visited.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about both the city of Strasbourg, which is a very, very interesting and very important city in France. And also, we're going to begin today with a little bit of background information about some specific regions. And in this case, it's the region called Alsace, or in the local dialect Alsace. And that's because even though in France there are departments, which is basically like saying very large counties, that's basically the administrative division of the country of France, there are really specific regions that have very cultural distinctions and long histories that are separate one from the other. And some of them people have heard of, Normandy, for instance.
Right.
And one of them that is very special and a little bit different from any of the others is, in fact, this region called Alsace.
Right.
So I thought we would begin, since I knew that we were going to talk about the city, For those of out there who really have no idea either where it is or what it is, I thought maybe we should do a little bit of a background about the area of Alsace.
Right.
And then, of course, we will segue into talking about the city of Strasbourg itself.
Excellent.
Okay, so Alsace is in the northeastern part of France. It's actually a region that is bordered by the Rhine River.
Right.
And on the other side is Germany.
Mm-hmm. Very, very close to
Very,
to
very, very
Strasbourg.
close. And of course, Strasbourg literally is on the Rhine. And if you go from Strasbourg just across on the bridges, you get into Germany.
Right.
It's a very, for that reason, it's now considered to be a very international city.
It is, yeah.
And for other reasons as well. But what makes the region specifically very strange, and that's the word I really want to use, is that it is the only part of what is now France that has been buffeted back and forth between Germany and France for centuries.
Yeah. Yeah. You can tell by looking around.
Well, the architecture, of course, in Alsace, in the villages, which are very beautiful, and in the city, in the traditional part of the city, the architecture is much more what we would call Germanic. It's kind of like what you imagine if you read, or if you have read, like I did as a child, lots of fairy tales from the Grimm brothers. I mean, exactly the kinds of drawings of the buildings that you see there.
yeah.
That's exactly what you see.
Yeah, the maison à colombage.
Right.
So in English, I looked at
half timbered.
That's right, half timbered.
Half timbered houses, beautiful
Yeah.
little villages. You kind of expect Little Red Riding Hood or Hansel and Gretel to come out of the woods somewhere around one of the villages.
Right, and I'll put lots of pictures on the post about the podcast. But I also made a separate section. You'll see on the website. There's now a new tab on the very top called Photos.
Photos.
And I'm putting like articles about places that I visit, that I take photos of, even if we haven't podcasted about it yet.
Right.
You know, because I can't wait. I'm sorry.
I know. You can't wait. I know. You're getting so ahead of us that when people write now and I see some of the comments about, oh, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. Well, of course, our mouths can only do so much, you know. So we'll get around to everything that's in the photos,
Right, but-
eventually.
yeah.
Eventually,
But you'll see more photos of Alsace there. As well.
there, right. Now, Alsace is, in fact, a region that goes back very, very far, as a lot of Western Europe does. And it was settled originally by Germanic tribes, which is very, very specific to the area because they were there way before even the Romans, who basically conquered all of Western Europe. And they settled in that area and never moved. And in doing some of the background research for Alsace and Strasbourg, I found out something that was really incredible. The dialect that they speak there still today, and of course, there's still about half the population that speaks the local dialect, even of course, if in school they all learned French. There are small villages where there are many people, even young people, who speak with each other in the local dialect. It's a dialect that goes back almost 1,600 years.
Oh, wow.
It's an ancient Germanic dialect. So it is actually not even like modern German, although people who speak German can understand most of what they say. But it's very, very specific, and it apparently didn't evolve that much. So it's in this region, which basically includes a couple of departments. One is the Lower Rhine, the other is the Upper Rhine.
So le Bas-Rhin et le Haut-Rhin.
And the Moselle.
And
the Moselle. And these are the areas where you have several cities that I have visited, Strasbourg and Colmar, and then another one called Mulhouse. And these are areas where there are a lot of people still who speak this very strange dialect. It is not, though, German. It is considered to be Alsatian.
Right.
And one of the things that you find if you meet people from the region who are really from there is that they really want to make it very clear that they are not German. They are Alsatian.
Right. The thing is, it sounds like German to French people
Right.
because it's close.
It's
you know.
close. It's a
So,
Germanic language.
To us, it's like it's just like when you get to Perpignan in southern France, it kind of starts looking like Spanish
Right.
a little
It's
bit. you know.
Catalan.
Yeah,
I know.
yeah.
So it's very interesting. So this was an area that was basically settled by a group of various Germanic peoples. And then, as with most of the rest of France, they were invaded by a group called the Franks. And of course, we know that the Franks gave the name to this wonderful country that we are in called France.
Right.
And they were another Germanic people, but they were a separate tribe, and this is, we're talking way back when there were different groups and different tribes, and nobody liked anybody, and they were fighting with each other. And it was basically, I'm pushing you out and I'm moving in.
Yeah.
And this is basically what happened, so that the Franks, who were a larger, more powerful group, they had taken over what is now Belgium, Luxembourg, and the northern part of France. And we're talking in the 600s and 700s.
Okay, long time ago.
And basically what happened was they came into this region that was peopled by these other Germanic tribes, and they conquered them. But they didn't push the people out. They just mixed in with them and basically said, okay, from now on, you're part of the Frankish Empire. And the Frankish Empire, of course, the person that is the most famous in relation to that is this man named Charlemagne.
That's right.
Carolus was actually his name in Latin. Charlie, we can call him if you want, Good old Charlie.
I like Charlemagne.
I like Charlemagne actually too.
Yeah. Charlemagne is good.
He was good. He was the grandson of the very first Frankish king who had united all of these various tribes into what was to become a kingdom. And what happened was, and we know this that because there are statues of him everywhere in school books here in France, everybody learns about him because he's considered to be the father of this country called France.
Yeah.
But in fact, he was German or Germanic, I mean, this is why, it's kind of crazy when people get nuts about who is who and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. We're all a mixture.
We're all a mixture. It doesn't matter. We're all a mixture at some time or another. But he was one of the first people to create a little bit of a city in the spot that is now Strasbourg.
Okay.
And of course, that was because it was on the Rhine. And most of these cities were very, very important because they used the rivers for transportation and for defensive purposes. They built defenses along the Rhine River up back and forth, and this goes back as far as the Romans. And I found something interesting. The original name of Strasbourg was Argentorit. Has nothing to do with Strasbourg.
You're going to have to spell that.
Yeah, Argentorate. How's that?
Never heard of that.
Never heard of it either.
No.
Never heard of it either. But that was its old, original name. And it's a name that basically disappeared after Charlemagne took over. Okay? And then what happened was the region stayed Germanic for a very long time because in the history of Western Europe, and specifically in the history of what became France, Charlemagne basically, he kept a unified area. In fact, the idea of what we have now with the European Union is almost the kind of thing that he was trying to do, except, of course, in those days, he was doing it more by getting on with his armor on a horse and running around with a sword in his hand. But we have...
Not quite what we do today.
Not quite. Well, hopefully. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're changing. But there was France and there was Germany and northern Italy. All was part of his kingdom.
Okay.
And he had some sons, and his oldest son gave the empire to his three sons. So the three sons that were basically the grandchildren of Charlemagne, they, at the time, unlike now, it's very interesting because I'm not sure now what the law is, for instance, in England, but at that time, in feudal times, you didn't give all of the land and property to the oldest son. You had to divide everything up among all the sons. No daughters, obviously. Daughters don't get anything, We know about that. They get a dowry. They get married off to somebody else, But what happened was there were three sons. Lothair, that was number one. Charles the Bald.
The Bald.
Okay. Yeah. Obviously, I assume he was bald. Otherwise, they wouldn't have called him that.
Probably.
His father was Pepin le Bref, which meant he was short.
Le Bref.
Yeah. And Louis. So there was Louis, Charles, and Lothair.
Okay.
And guess what happened? The second and the third sons, they got together and they said, hey, we really don't think that we want to divide this whole big kingdom up and give Lothair the biggest portion. And interestingly enough, without killing Lothair, they basically came to an agreement, having worked themselves up and created these armies. They went to see their big brother, and they basically said, listen, we want you to sign this agreement with us. And we're just going to give you a couple of small little areas to take care of yourself. And I have no idea, to be honest, whether it's because he really seemed incompetent or whether they just were greedy or what.
Yeah.
But he agreed. So you wonder really what was going on.
Maybe he was dumb.
Maybe he was dumb. So anyway, Charles the Bald and Louis divided up all of this, and they basically cut it in half. And there we have France and Germany.
Oh, okay.
So we pretty much, with some changes along the frontier, with the Rhine and all of this going through the Alps and everything else, we have some movement, but we're talking about over 1,000 years where the idea of what is France and what is Germany has really been established.
Yes, 1,000 years is long
That's
enough
a
to
long
establish
time.
a border.
That's a long time. However, this region called Alsace doesn't change, and it's a separate independent region. And somehow they negotiated to stay as a kind of intermediary region between French society and German society, and kept their Germanic language all through all of these centuries.
Sure.
And eventually, during the time of the Renaissance, was forced by the French kings to start speaking French. Because it fell into the territory that was considered to be part of the French part of this empire, even though in background and in culture and in affinity, it really, really, really was closer to the German part. And so starting in the 14 and 1500s, people did have to start speaking French, but in their homes, they still kept this Germanic language. And the architecture is very much more Germanic than it is French. And it stayed that way all through the centuries. And basically what you have is up through into the Louis, our wonderful Louis, the 14th, 15th, and 16th, which is already getting up almost, into modern times.
Yeah.
This remained a separate area with a free trade agreement, and the city of Strasbourg became very important because it was on the river and because it was allowed to be, and there were several cities like this in Western Europe. It's what they called a free city, which meant that it was a trade zone with special tax initiatives. I mean, we understand all of that today.
Yeah.
And because they used it as a kind of buffer zone between France and Germany, it stayed prosperous for centuries and centuries and centuries.
It looks pretty prosperous today, too.
Very prosperous. It is, in fact, it is probably in France, I would say, one of the 3 or 4 most prosperous cities that we have. So basically what happened was you have this region which continues to develop with various different things. You have a lot of vineyards, as you know from having driven through this area.
Yep.
Alsace is a very interesting area because it is on the eastern side of low old mountains called the Vosges Mountains, which are kind of like the Appalachian Mountains in the States, in that they're the oldest mountains in France, so they're not very high. But on the western side, they collect enormous amounts of rain and snow coming from the Atlantic, and it gathers all on the western side. So on the eastern slopes, you have a lot of sun, and the soil is different. And so, lo and behold, since the Roman times, they have used the slopes on the eastern side, that is in Alsace, to grow wine grapes. And so Alsace
and it's good stuff.
Is very, very famous for its wines.
Yeah.
And the villages are usually really beautiful. And it's the area is very sunny, and it has, even though what we call a continental climate, it's known for having lots and lots of sun, which you wouldn't expect, being that it's in the northeast. But it does.
Yeah.
Now, a couple of dates starting in the more not so long ago past. In the year 1681, Louis XIV, our guy from Versailles, he attacked the city because Strasbourg wanted to keep its independence. In other words, there was lots of fighting starting about the 1500s, believe it or not, between the Protestants and the Catholics. Strasbourg is in a region where it was one of the first regions to go and move to this new religion, which was the Protestant religion, which was largely due to Luther.
Yes.
He put his first edicts up on the doors of the cathedral in Strasbourg. And so it was a region that very quickly moved to the new Reformed Church, which is, of course, what it's called in France, which was the Protestant Church. And there was even a time, because of that in the cathedral, in order to accommodate everybody, they divided the cathedral in half. And they actually put up some kind of dividing wall inside that huge cathedral. And on one side, they would have Catholic services. And on the other side, they would have Protestant services as a way of appeasing the people. It's crazy. But you know what? At least it was an attempt to stop war. Yeah. Because that's really what was going on. There was war. There was a period that was called the 30 Years' War, where it was the Catholics and the Protestants, and they were fighting each other. And of course, there was that all over France, but unfortunately, it's always done a lot of damage. So what happened was that Louis XIV said, enough is enough. We have the region of Alsace and Lorraine, and it's now part of our kingdom. I'm going to stop this nonsense with Strasbourg being an independent city. And he attacked the city with 30,000 troops, and they gave in after 2 days because they weren't really prepared to fight. They weren't prepared to withstand the king and his troops. And so in 1681, the city of Strasbourg officially became part of France, which it had not been. It was a separate city-state.
Oh, wow.
It had just been a separate entity all by itself.
1681.
Which is really fascinating. Because
that's a long time ago, though.
It's a long time ago, except that in terms of the history of France, when you think that 100 years later, you have the French Revolution, basically.
Yeah.
Strasbourg maintained it. You know, there were a few other separate city-states. They were in the Hanseatic League in Germany. These were places that prided themselves on the fact that they could make their own taxes, make their own laws. They didn't belong to anybody. And basically, they didn't belong to any country, even though they were inside other countries. And so all of a sudden, Strasbourg found itself to be French.
Okay.
So Strasbourg became French in 1681. And we're going to just mention a couple of other things, but it stayed French until 1870. And it was in 1870 when the Prussians attacked France that they took Strasbourg and Alsace back.
And by Prussians, you mean
the
Germans.
Prussians, the Germans. But, you know, Prussia was not, it was part. It was like the Berlin and the western and northern part of what is now Germany is basically what Prussia was. Because then you had a lot of other city-states, and the southern part, Bavaria, and Munich was a separate country.
Okay.
And then in 1870, when the Germans, that is the Prussians, attacked France, they took back Strasbourg and they took back Alsace and another region called Lorraine, which is just next to it. And they made it German again. And of course, the Alsatians didn't want to be German, and they didn't really want to be French, even though they'd gotten used to being French. They wanted to be Alsatian.
Yeah.
And Strasbourg wound up being the key city in all of this because it is on the border between the two countries and because it was an extremely prosperous and developed city with a huge university since the Renaissance. And it was a key place to have. Next to Paris, it was very important. And it stayed German from 1870 until the end of World War I, when the Western forces won World War I. Alsace and Strasbourg went back to being part of France.
Right.
In 1940, it was occupied and taken over again by the Germans. By this time, however, we're talking about an enormous amount of resistance to this. This is no longer, in the past, I think it was, there was this kind of fatalism about it because they didn't kill the people. They just said, okay, now you're German, now you're French, now you're German, now you're French.
Yeah, that would be confusing.
It's confusing, especially because you don't know who you're supposed to pay your taxes to. Yeah. But basically they were left alone to live their lives. Whereas, of course, we know that in 1940, when Alsace and Strasbourg were taken, it was quite different, and there was a massive exodus from the city of 120,000 people, and those people who stayed, a lot of them were casualties of the war, and a lot of the men who were in Alsace were taken to do forced labor in Germany. And some of them were sent to the Russian front. And most of the men who were sent to the Russian front never came back.
Yeah.
And there was even a little bit of an episode because the Alsatians were in a very, very sensitive situation. Because they spoke German, the French didn't trust them. Even though they considered themselves at that point to be basically French. We're talking about World War II.
Yeah, it's really complicated.
It's very complicated. And so a lot of them were put in prison, even though they had no reason to be put in prison. And a lot of the people were ostracized. And in order to prove themselves to be loyal, a lot of the Alsatian men went and fought in the southern part of France, because it was as far away from where they came from as possible. But there was a lot of antagonism towards them. So it was a rather sad episode in their history. And it is kind of a shame. Something that most people don't know, and I bet you don't know it.
There's a lot of things I don't know.
The song that we all know of in France as the Marseillaise,
Yeah.
which is the national anthem.
Yeah.
It was written by somebody in Strasbourg.
Oh, wow. I did not know that. No.
It is actually a song that was written by a man for the French Revolution. His name was Rouget de Lille.
Yeah, I knew the name.
He was from Strasbourg.
Oh, wow.
And the song was originally called A Song for the Army of the Rhine, fighting against the Germans.
Oh.
And what happened was that it wound up being called the Marseillaise because
far away from Strasbourg.
Far away, right? Very far away. During the French Revolution, the song was sent around to the various groups that were fighting in the revolution. And the first unit that actually walked into Paris singing the song was from Marseille.
Oh, so that's why they called La Marseillaise.
In 1792.
I had never heard
Isn't that wonderful?
I might have heard it at school, but I don't remember.
I think it's such a great story.
That is a really good story.
Isn't that a good story?
Yeah.
So they walked in, and the people surrounding them applauded and said, "These are the Marseillaise people, and there's their song." And this poor guy, he didn't get credit for the fact that he was from Alsace and he had written this wonderful revolutionary song. So it's kind of strange.
It's definitely revolutionary. The words
it's very
are
revolutionary.
kind of bloody.
And one other thing that I think is actually fascinating, but that goes back further, and I didn't say it before, so I'm going to add it in now, because again, this is one of those things that I just find so fascinating. In the time of Charlemagne, when his grandsons were setting up this deal to divvy up the land between what is now France and Germany, the two sons, who obviously got along, they didn't kill each other off, they did something absolutely incredible. They created what is called the Sermon of Strasbourg.
Okay.
It's a document that still exists.
Okay.
You can actually go to, I think it's the museum in Strasbourg that has, or it's probably now in the National something or other archives in Paris that has the original. But this is what they did. They wrote up a treaty. And the son who was going to take the part that became Germany, he wrote his in the language of the Roman part, which is the French part, and the other son, the son who was going to take what became eventually France, he wrote it in the Germanic dialect. Now, this document is the first example of writing in French in history.
Really?
Yep. Because prior to that, everything was written in Latin when it was official.
That's true.
And the vernacular language of what eventually became French was out of this local version of Latin mixed in with a little bit of words that were Celtic and a little bit of words that were German.
Right.
And so this document, which still exists...
And what's the name of the document?
It's called the Sermon of Strasbourg.
The Sermon of Strasbourg.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to look that up.
And so it is considered to be by historians and linguists the very first example of writing in French.
Excellent.
Isn't that cool?
It's very cool.
Although I did read what it said, and I couldn't understand a word of it. It's it's really early French.
It's very old
It's
French.
very old French. It's
Yeah.
very close to Latin, but it is not considered Latin anymore. It is considered to be the first time. And they were really, imagine, the brother that was going to take over the part that was German, he was saying to the others, hey, I'm going to write this in your language. And they did that, and they kept the peace. They just said, okay, this is yours, this is mine.
So there is a way for peace.
There is a way for peace.
Yeah, yeah.
And Strasbourg, of course, that's why, besides its beautiful historical center, one of the things that makes Strasbourg so interesting is its very modern history in relation to, of course, what is now Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's the history of Alsace.
Wonderful.
After the end of World War II, of course, there was a certain amount of payment done for damages, and there's a lot of the suffering. There were young women that were taken into forced labor, and they were even also treated very poorly by a lot of the French people for a while. It's kind of sad, but it wasn't their fault because they really have this separate culture, this separate dialect.
Yeah.
And in the villages, you still feel that. In the big city like Strasbourg, you don't feel that anymore.
Well, you kind of do. I mean, what I was listening out for when I was there is I was trying to listen to see if they have a pronounced local accent when they speak French. And I didn't hear one.
You didn't hear it?
I didn't hear it. And I don't know if I went to the wrong place. We didn't go to any other villages. We just went to Strasbourg. So maybe that's why.
That may be why, because I know I have, and there are certain French accents I can't really hear. Some I can, but I can hear the distinctive.
You can hear that one.
Yeah, I can hear it. And I did once, a number of years ago, go to Colmar, which is smaller.
Yeah, Colmar,
It's a smaller city than Strasbourg. It's a little further south. It's very, very beautiful. Mm-hmm. And in Colmar, they speak Alsatian to each other, and they will speak to you in French, but they do prefer to speak in Alsatian. And that is even young people. I mean, not if you go to school. In school, you do have to, of course, do your studies in French. But it's a little bit, it made me feel a little bit like when I had gone to Quebec. And you knew that everybody really understood English, but they spoke to you in French, in Quebecois, because that's what they wanted you to understand is their language. And that's the feeling I got in Colmar. Now, in the places that are touristy, there are some villages like Riekeweer, which is a gorgeous little village. These are little villages that are magnificent and very touristy. Everyone, of course, speaks French, and everyone speaks German and English because it lives
very
off
touristy.
of tourism.
Yes.
But I think if you go to some smaller places where you don't have too many tourists, you will see that it really is a special dialect. And in Strasbourg, of course, the thing about Strasbourg now is that it's a city that is the seventh biggest metropolitan area in France, and the city itself has about 300,000 people.
I think it's more than that.
The city, as opposed to the metropolitan area.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Metropolitan area is supposed to have about 750,000, which makes it almost the size of Toulouse. And of that population, at least half is not Alsatian.
Okay, so they attract a lot of...
you will have people from all over France because it's a huge, important city.
Well, and also the European Parliament is there.
Exactly.
I don't know if you were going to mention that.
Yeah, I was going to mention all the different organizations that are there. And of course, that means that you have an enormous number of people, but also because it has a huge university section. It has a lot of research. It does a lot of medical research. It's got a lot of activity. It brings people from other places. It is economically probably one of the most vibrant cities first of all, in all of France, but probably in all of Western Europe. And it's a city that has a lot going for it besides the beautiful historical parts. Just a couple of things, because then I know you're itching to give your impressions of the cathedral and all of that. The entire old city center, which is centered around what is called the Big Island, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
Yeah.
So everything is preserved in what is called Little France, which is this old section on the islands in the middle of the river. And it has a sense of history when you walk through it. But it is also a place, just a couple of statistics, just to give people an idea. It is, Paris is 397 kilometers away. which is about 250 miles. Mm-hmm. And Zurich is 185 kilometers away. So that it's really...
Stuttgart is
136.
Yeah.
It's 750 kilometers from the Atlantic or from the Baltic. And so if you drew a right angle from Strasbourg and went straight north up to the Baltic or went to the Atlantic, it's the same distance, ironically. Isn't that weird? You'd think it wouldn't be, but it is.
Yeah.
And it is 850 kilometers to Toulouse and 500 straight down to the Mediterranean.
Okay.
So it's really it's in a central part of Western Europe.
Right, which is why they put the European Parliament there.
They put it there for that reason, and they put it there for another reason. And the reason they put it there is because... I'm going to find that quote. So why don't you start talking about your experience with it?
Okay. So we had like 24 hours. It was a short visit because we were really visiting family in Stuttgart. And really, I was astonished by this city. I thought that the architecture was beautiful, although quite similar to what I had seen in Germany. But the church in particular made a big impression on me.
Yeah.
First of all, it's massive. It's a massive Gothic church. But what I loved is that I had brought camera equipment and I was able to zoom in on details of the church, and they were all just wonderful. So I'm going to put pictures. This is a strange thing that I like to do. When I go to churches, I like to look for disturbing things.
Oh dear. Why?
I like to look for the gory stuff.
Gory.
Yeah, I like to look for the decapitations and the terrible devils and all of that. And I can find them in most churches. Yeah, if you look close enough and with a good zoom lens, you will find. So I was looking for stuff, and I was just delighted how cunningly they had hidden all these terrible scenes.
That's why you like Halloween. Now I understand.
Yeah, it's kind of Halloween.
It's very Halloween.
It's that kind of thing. But the church is beautiful. The stained glass windows in there are wonderful. And the thing that I particularly love, but I couldn't get good pictures of it because my wide angle broke just as we were arriving in Strasbourg, is they have the astronomical clock inside of the church, and it's just gorgeous. I have pictures of details of it, but I don't have an ensemble view of the whole thing. But it is just magnificent. And every hour you have the little people that come out. It's like a cuckoo clock, but just much bigger. It shows the different bits about stars and planets.
It's an astronomical clock.
Yes, it's an astronomical clock, and it still works, and it's just gorgeous. And they have also right in front of it, they have this big pillar that's full of statues. That's also quite spectacular. On the other side of the church, they have a beautiful kind of bas-relief.
Yeah.
It looks like war scenes to me.
It is war scenes.
Okay.
It is war scenes.
Okay.
Now, the church is, of course, Notre Dame. That's the name of it.
Yes.
And it's made of pink sandstone.
Yes.
Which is very, very beautiful.
A lot of it is black, though. They've started...
sooted.
Yeah, they've started cleaning it up, but I think they really need to put a big effort into that because a lot of it looks dark.
What happens with the stone like that, the limestone like in Paris or the sandstone, is that, of course, with the centuries, you get the pollution gets absorbed into the stone, which is what really makes it black. And unfortunately, it's an extraordinarily expensive thing to clean it up. And I would assume that they are going to do it little by little because they did do that in the cathedral in Reims, and they did that, of course, with Notre Dame in Paris. And after a while you have to, because otherwise it eats away at the stone.
Yeah.
But the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Strasbourg was begun in the very beginning of the 1200s.
Mm-hmm.
The spire was actually not the top of this very fabulous high spire, was not actually put on until almost 400 years later.
Oh, wow.
It took that long to completely finish.
It's very tall. It's like 158 meters or something. I looked it up, but I can't remember. But
It's an incredible.
It's very tall.
It's late Gothic. It's very, very tall. It's very huge. And of course, one of the reasons, as with a lot of big cathedrals like that it took so long to finish is, unfortunately, the war. Mm-hmm. So every time there was some kind of fighting in the region, everything stopped, you know, and you don't keep on building at that time.
Yeah.
And then by the time they did the spire, everything had pretty much calmed down. Mm-hmm. But it's a fabulous, fabulous.
Oh, it's
cathedral.
beautiful. It's a little bit difficult to get pictures of it because you can't step back very far. The buildings around it are very close.
Yes.
So you really need a good wide angle, and it was busted. So
there's only
mine
one
was
side
busted.
that has a big open esplanade.
Yeah, but even that, you see it through. I'll put a picture up. You see it through a street.
Right.
You know, it's not like Notre Dame where you can step back and see the whole thing very well. The buildings are probably 20 meters away.
The buildings are 20 meters away. And of course, as I had mentioned to you, it is a fact that at the time that these cathedrals were built, and this is true for all of them, there's none that is an exception. They were built in the middle of all of this very congested housing that was from the Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. And it really is meant to look like an eruption. You know, and this is this idea that the cathedral is this humongous thing that just rises out of all of these little houses.
Yeah.
And what's interesting in Strasbourg is that it's one of the few where it's been maintained like that. Whereas in most of the other places, they've cleared out the areas around the churches, so that people can move back and look at it.
They have such beautiful houses all around there that it'd be a shame to tear them down.
Well, it's really gorgeous, you know, and it is unlike a lot of other places because it is very much more German in its style of architecture. It is very beautiful to see all of these lovely half-timbered houses. Mm-hmm. The thing about Alsace and about Strasbourg and the whole region is it's famous for being a region where people take very good care of things. And it's relatively clean.
Oh, yeah.
And the villages are very clean. So everything is very, very well cared for. And, of course, being that it's now the whole old section, which is from the Middle Ages. All the houses are from the 1500s and 1600s. It's all part of a World UNESCO site. It has to be kept up. Modern Strasbourg. So Strasbourg is an incredibly dynamic city. It's a beautiful city. The city center is absolutely gorgeous with its waterways and the old buildings.
Yeah, they have canals.
You
can take the boat ride on the canals.
And this is the history of Strasbourg. So this is the quote I was looking for. The British Minister of Foreign Affairs, right after World War II, was when they decided that there was going to be an effort made to make some kind of not just United Nations, but a European community so that there would be no more war. I mean, now let's face it, the 20th century was devastating for Europe, absolutely devastating. And when they were trying to decide where to set up the very first European Council, which was in 1947, so this is just 2 years after the end of World War II, the British minister, he said, and I'm quoting, he says, "We're looking for a place, a city, which will be acceptable to all European countries and which will become a symbol of a united Europe. Strasbourg seems to be the most logical choice. This great city has been victim of and witness to the stupidity of humans who have tried to deal with problems by war, cruelty, and destruction." And so they made Strasbourg the seat of the European Council. It is also the seat of many of the other organizations that are attached to now what is called the European Community. And strangely enough, that is shared with the city of Brussels in Belgium. But it is the seat of the Court of Human Rights.
Yes.
Of the European Parliament.
Yes. And the European Parliament, unfortunately, you cannot visit it very often. They have special opening days But it's a few times a year.
Is that right?
Yeah, there's no organized visits. But we got a small glimpse into it just sitting at a cafe, because there was a young lady and a much older man sitting next to us, and they were obviously discussing school. She was a student.
Right.
And at one point, the man got out an article from a newspaper, and they were speaking in French. Once in a while, they switched to English, but it was mostly French. And what he was having her do is read an article and simultaneously translate it into English.
Wow.
So this was interesting to me, because most of my career I've been a technical translator,
right.
but not a simultaneous translator.
That's very hard.
That's a very different skill.
Yes.
And I was just flabbergasted how fast she could read something in French and say it in perfect English.
Yes.
It was really, really good. And the man was coaching her as to, what to practice. And apparently that's how they practice. I didn't even realize that's how they would do it. Is you read something in one language and read it at normal reading pace in another. That was just because, of course, in Europe we have all these languages.
You have all these languages, and of course, in the European Parliament, you have to have translations of everything.
Yes, they translate everything.
They translate everything. Although it is true,
but not in all languages, right?
No, exactly. Right. What I was going to say, you have German, French, and English that are the lingua francas,
and not Spanish.
I don't know. Something that I don't know the answer to, but I've always wondered how they decided to make English the official lingua franca, especially considering that England itself is recalcitrant and doesn't particularly want to be part of the major arms of the European community.
I don't know. I don't know.
But just to.
But it's only a part of England that doesn't.
It's only a part of England that doesn't. But still, They became then the home of the European Council. Officially in 1949, the European Parliament in 1952, the European Court of Human Rights, which basically covers all human rights everywhere in the world, in 1998.
Right.
And it is really a city that has become a symbol of all of that. It has a huge biotech section in its industry. It does a lot of pharmaceutical research. It has a huge university and a major theater and opera, which the Strasbourg the National Theater is very, very famous. Mm-hmm. And so it's maintained its kind of Renaissance quality as a city because it is really all of those things.
Yeah, I think if you're visiting France and you've never been to that part of France, which I had never been myself, I really think it's well worth a visit.
So do I. I really do.
It's just different, but in a very pleasant way.
Exactly. It's and some people will say, "Oh, it's." I have to say, I did spend a year living in the northeast of France. Mm-hmm. I was in the Vosges. I was on the wet side, on the side that saw no sun, which is when I actually spent a lot of time going to Strasbourg and going to all of these beautiful villages on the east side because I couldn't stand not seeing the sun for weeks at a time. Mm-hmm. And it is... it's a region that is wonderful. It's very beautiful. Some people think, oh, it's very Germanic. I mean, I've heard people say that to me, but you know what? So is northern France, which was Flemish. I mean, there's regional history all over France.
Oh, and anywhere you go, I mean, if you get close to Italy, you start getting
Italian.
Yeah, and Catalonia, it's very Catalan.
So here we have to talk about the most important parts of doing something like this, which is food. Obviously,
of course.
Food.
Finally,
and
we
wine.
get to food.
Food and wine. So Alsatian wines, I think most people have heard of some of them. Riesling.
Yeah.
Gewürztraminer.
Yes, I was hoping you'd say that because I can't say it. I can buy the bottles.
I'm good at that.
I'm good at that.
The Gewürztraminer is a little bit sweet. It's a very, very famous.
Not too much.
white, and then the very, very famous red, which is Tokay, which actually originally comes from Hungary, believe it or not.
I don't think I've had that one.
Tokay is delicious.
Huh.
Yeah.
Dang it! I'm gonna have to buy a bottle.
Yeah, well, here we
now.
go. And no cheese. We're not going to talk about cheese today. But the main classical dish that is identified, of course, with Strasbourg and with all of Alsace, which is the dish, the food, the food.
Choucroute.
Choucroute, which basically translates into English and really doesn't do it justice as sauerkraut.
Right, but because the sauerkraut is just the vegetable.
Because the sauerkraut is the vegetable, which is, of course, for those of you who don't know it, fermented cabbage, which has been cooked with juniper berries and a whole bunch of other things, bay leaves and spices. And it's served on a huge platter with sausage and chunks of pork, roast pork, and it's really the dish
and they have
of
different
the region.
Yeah, they have different sausages
And potatoes.
I mean,
all kinds of. It's definitely not a vegetarian's dish. Okay.
No,
but
I mean, if you just eat the cabbage, I guess.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Well, I like the cabbage myself,
and it's cooked with some of this wonderful white wine. There's Riesling in the wine.
I saw it. I saw that they sometimes cook it with champagne. Sometimes they cook it with beer. Sometimes they cook it with Riesling.
They actually use champagne. What a waste!
Yeah,
there you are. And then, of course, yes. So it is. It's like if you're going to go there, you really do have to try it.
Yeah,
right?
try some sauerkraut.
You have to try sauerkraut.
Unless you hate it. But
There's the other basic dish, which is a lot simpler, and it's the kind of thing you can take a piece of and walk around and eat, which is the Flammkuchen, which is basically, if you imagine an Alsatian version of pizza dough, but with onions and a layer of a kind of cream sauce, a little bit of cream sauce, and pieces of bacon bits on it.
Yes.
Right?
So Flammkuchen is how I've heard it, or tarte flambée in French. Is it's really cool. It's like a pizza but with a sour cream base instead of a tomato base.
Exactly.
And then they can put whatever on it. And when I was there, I had one. So they served this Flammkuchen with pesto on it and some bitter greens.
And some nouvelle cuisine.
Yeah, it was nouvelle cuisine. It was very good, actually. We didn't want anything too heavy or too much. And my husband had a foie gras. It was also pretty much Flammkuchen, just the cooked
with foie
dough
gras.
With foie gras and
and there is some production of foie gras in the area. If you go to the villages outside of Strasbourg in the countryside, you see lots of geese and ducks walking around. So it is a region besides the southwest that does produce a lot of foie gras. Interestingly enough, and they do eat goose a lot there, actually. At Christmas time, that's what they eat.
I kept seeing stores. I thought, I even took some pictures of stores that were advertising the fact that they were selling goose products. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange because that's more southwest normally. That's what we French people associate with southwestern food.
But I think it actually is traditionally something that is eaten in at least western or northwestern Germany as well. And of course the last, which is the dessert, which is Kugelhopf.
Ah, yes.
Which is a wonderful cake that there's a Kugelhopf pan. I have one at home.
Well, it's like a bundt cake pan.
It's a bundt cake, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. And of course, it's the traditional cake that comes from this region.
I didn't try it.
It's very good. It's like a coffee cake. So in the States would be considered to be a great kind of cake to have with coffee in the middle of the afternoon. It's not gooey. There's no cream. It's basically a basic cake with some cinnamon. And, of course, they use spices like cinnamon and nutmeg because that's the kinds of spices that you use in that region and as you go further north.
Yeah.
So it's something that I really like. But it's not something you would eat just as a... I don't know. You have to have it with something, tea or coffee or something like that.
I think the gastronomy of the area is very nice.
It's very nice.
It's definitely very sauerkraut oriented.
Yes,
but
sauerkraut oriented. I like that.
But it was really lovely. So I think it's worth a visit on that account as well.
Now, just as a very last minute thing, we don't usually do this, but I just wanted to do this just in case. If you are going to stay in Paris and you are interested in taking a trip to Strasbourg, there is a bullet train It has been
A TGV.
TGV,
Yep.
and it has been working for a few years now. I can't remember exactly. 400 kilometers takes you 2 hours and 20 minutes. It's a
That's really good.
really, really good ride. It's very fast, very modern train. It's not cheap. The train ride basically costs anywhere, from what I could see, between about 86 to 110 euros one way, depending on the time of the day and the day.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not so much.
But
it's a long way
you
to go.
are going 400 kilometers.
Yeah, that's a long way to go.
And you can also take a plane. Air France has planes that go from Paris to Strasbourg. And you can get a round-trip ticket if you do it in advance for 170, which basically is the same as a train ticket. And that takes an hour to an hour and 15 minutes one way.
The airport is a little bit out of
But
the way,
the airport
though.
is a little bit out of the
Yeah,
way. And
yeah.
of course, with Strasbourg, as with most major cities, if you want to be in the city center, it's best to be on a train.
Take the train. Yeah, the train station is right in the middle of everything.
Right in the middle of everything.
Yeah, and it's easy. I don't know that I would do it as a day trip from
No,
Paris.
I don't think so. I think it's a good one, at least an overnighter.
Yeah, I think if you were in Paris and wanted to go, yeah, do it overnight. If you spend a full 24 hours in Strasbourg, you will get a taste of it.
Yes.
But I would have liked to stay an extra day.
An extra day.
Yeah.
I agree with you. I think it's far enough away and there's enough to see that it's worth it being a trip where you leave one morning, stay overnight, and come back maybe at the end of the afternoon the next day.
Right. And we didn't go into a single museum or anything because we didn't have time. But I did spend the whole afternoon in the cathedral checking out all the everything.
All the horrible gore.
Yeah. And I was like a kid in a candy store. my husband, after a while, he just left. He was like, okay, I've had enough. You just point and shoot. I must have taken like 2,000 pictures. I even had some people come up to me and say, wow, you really like this. And yeah, I do.
Okay, well, we know we have to take you to some other places where there's some gore, I guess.
Well, it's not necessarily the gore. I love the stained glass windows too. They were gorgeous.
No, it is really one of the most beautiful cathedrals.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, for some reason, people don't talk about it as much as they talk about some of the others because I really think, and this is just my idea, I think that the reason is because it's associated with Germanic style architecture.
Uh-huh.
And so it's not included when we talk about Notre Dame of Paris, Chartres, Amiens, all these other cathedrals, even though they're all Gothic and they're all fabulous. But it's definitely beautiful, and Strasbourg is definitely a beautiful city to visit.
Yeah, I think for me it was lovely because I could see so much more from my pictures than I could with my own eyes.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit dark in there. And so it's one of those places where if you might walk in and walk out half an hour later and go, well, that was dark. So I got more out of it through the pictures than I did just using my eyes. And that's unfortunate. I think they should light up these churches a little more, or have spotlights on the interesting stuff. But then how do they choose? Because it's all gorgeous.
Yeah, and I think that you're getting into an issue that is always a problem, which is, what do you do in terms of lighting up things that either can be fragile and therefore sensitive to light, or how much does it cost inside a huge cathedral to do all of that? Those are ongoing questions.
Well, there are a few places in the Strasbourg Cathedral where you can put a 50-cent thing to just light up for a few minutes.
They do that in Italy a lot.
Yeah.
They don't do that much in France, but
Yeah.
it is a good idea because at least it just lights up for a minute or two.
But it's not very bright light either. It's I think they need to make an effort, but of course I'm always nitpicking about stuff. So
yeah,
there were hundreds and hundreds of people in there, and nobody seemed to be complaining. So
it's still. Let's put it this way. Even if it gets a little bit dark inside, we know that this is definitely a trip that you should take.
Yeah. I recommend it. It's very nice.
So there's our day in Strasbourg and our Alsatian history.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I would like to remind you that we're going to start offering some Join Us in France tours. If you would like to be advised, of upcoming tours, just subscribe to the website. That's the place on the website, jonasinfrance.com, where you have a little green button. You put your email address. Typically, I only send out one email a week, and I'm not planning on doing any more than that. I send an email that says, there's a new episode. You can go get it.
You can go get it.
Right. And I will include in that email information about tours once we have it. Also, next week, we will be releasing an extra episode on D-Day.
A very special one.
A very special one. And that will come out. I can't remember if it's on a Thursday or on a Wednesday. But anyway, there'll be 2 episodes early in June. So thank you very much, everybody. And we hope that you have enjoyed this show. And let us know.
And let us know.
If you have questions or comments or whatever, we're happy to hear from you.
And go out and buy a bottle of Alsatian wine.
All right. Au revoir, everybody.
Au revoir.